The year is 1970. You are standing at a platform in West Germany, waiting for your express train to arrive. But what you see thundering towards you in the distance is not a standard electric. Its shape seems futuristic and yet faintly reminiscent of some bygone stars. The pride and joy of the Deutsche Bundesbahn, the result of many years of devoted development and vigorous testing, the most powerful locomotive rails had ever seen. But the trouble was far from over. But let's go a few years back first. When in 1961, development of the new 200 km per hour high-speed locomotive began, it was clear from the beginning that only very little could be carried over from older locomotive designs. And when in 1965, the first prototype of the so-called Class E03 was finally delivered to the Deutsche Bundesbahn, the Federal Railway of West Germany, it was the first of an entirely new kind of locomotive. But the path towards serial construction was still much longer than anticipated. Following changes in the operational rules for railways, the Deutsche Bundesbahn planned to increase the top speed of regular express trains from 140 km per hour to 160. These express trains were supposed to be pulled by the future serial machines of the Class E03. Express trains that were much heavier, however, than the fairly short flagship trains the E03 was designed for. While proving the worth at high speeds, the prototypes of the E03 continuously had difficulties with inclines and with heavy trains, leading to frequent overheating. For the planned serial machines to be able to pull heavy express trains on a regular basis, the power of the prototypes was simply not sufficient, making modifications to the motors and transformer necessary, increasing the already concisely calculated weight. Through the use of higher rated insulating material, however, the size of the motors didn't increase, and the total weight gain could be kept at a minimum. Ultimately, the power output was raised by about 25% to more than 10,000 metric horsepower continuously, or 16,000 short term for acceleration. Numbers that even to this day only very few single unit locomotives can rival, and none could back then. But the increased power made also improvements to the ventilation necessary, leading to the most obvious difference between the prototypes and the serial machines, with the addition of a second row of ventilators to the engine room covers. The first serial machines were finally delivered in 1970. With the introduction of computer numbers, the prototypes were renamed to Class 103.0 and the serial machines were now delivered as Class 103.1 to reflect their increased power, leading to greater versatility. Initially, 75 machines had been ordered in 1969, but the demand of this new locomotive increased even further with the introduction of the intercity network in 1971, leading to in total 70 additional locomotives being ordered that year and the year after, and delivery of the final batch concluded in 1974. The locomotives were equipped with a plethora of electric components used for the very first time in serial machines, and therefore would have required extensive testing before final acceptance. But as the new locomotives were desperately needed in revenue service, the acceptance procedure was split in two. The first acceptance was aimed at the mechanical part of the locomotive, as well as its overall safety, and allowed them to be put into service. The electric components were then thoroughly watched during regular service, leading finally, if no issues arose or could be taken care of by the manufacturer, to the final and full acceptance of the locomotive. And the year-long trials of the 4 prototypes in regular service very much paid out as the serial machines entered service without causing too much trouble. Except for when they did. There were 2 major design flaws that became apparent only after a significant amount of locomotives was already put into service. Due to the aerodynamic spheric shape of the ends, while keeping the locomotive as short as possible, the cabs turned out to be very cramped, with the driver sitting pretty much directly against the rear wall of the cab. This becomes especially uncomfortable with 2 people in the cab, as it was mandatory for speeds over 140 km per hour. To make matters even worse, these incredibly powerful locomotives were originally not fitted with air conditioning, and it was not rare for them to heat up to 55 degrees Celsius on long runs. To address these issues, the final batch of 30 locomotives received 35 cm longer caps on both ends, as well as air conditioning. While it was feared the resulting longer overhangs would negatively affect the riding of the locomotive, this proved not to be the case. All other serial machines were subsequently fitted with air conditioning too, but for them it was already too late to receive the longer caps. But the other design flaw was even more serious. While both diamond-shaped and single-arm pantographs were tested with the prototypes, both were found to behave equally good during the trials, and the proven diamond-shaped ones fitted with a special head suitable for 200 km per hour were chosen for the serial machines. In hindsight, a big mistake. During high speeds, it is normal for the contact pressure of the pantograph head to increase due to air pressure. But with the chosen pantographs, it increased far more than expected, exceeding the safe maximum. The more serial machines were put in service, the more incidents of damaged or even torn down overhead wires were recorded. So many, in fact, one of the trains pulled by the class became known as Edler Reißer, which probably translates best to Noble Ripper. As modifications to the pantographs did not improve things, and due to the urgency of the situation, it was decided to replace all respective pantographs with single-armed ones. The industry, however, was not able to deliver the required amount at short notice. Only the not yet built final batch was fitted with single-arm pantographs from the beginning. Instead, their respective pantographs needed to be exchanged with conventional diamond-shaped ones, which happened in 1971 and 72. Many of them were taken in exchange from slower locomotives, as the problematic pantographs from the class 103 could be safely used with speeds up to 120 km per hour. But this was hardly a long-term solution, as the conventional diamond-shaped pantographs were only allowed up to 160 km per hour, with the top speed of the 103 being 200. But soon after, a different locomotive class with single-arm pantographs went into production, which due to its top speed of just 160 km per hour, not necessarily needed them. The class 111, the successor of the D10. So it was done what had to be done. The newly delivered class 111 locomotives immediately lost their single-arm pantographs, or never received them in the first place, and conventional diamond-shaped ones from the class 103 were fitted instead. In total, 80 machines of the class 103 received their new pantographs this way, while the rest got theirs finally through new spare part deliveries. The second and final pantograph swap happened in 1976 and 1977, and at last enabled the class 103.1 to be the high-speed locomotive, raising traveling speed to 200 km per hour that Deutsche Bundesbahn needed for their competition with road and air traffic. And busy they were, with up to 350,000 run kilometers per locomotive per year. The class 103 became the face for West Germany's intercity network. But they couldn't last forever. With the first generation of the ICE, a new era of express trains approached in the late 1980s. And in the 1990s, after 20 years of heavy work, they were quite worn out, with the frequency of faults increasing drastically. A replacement was needed and came in the late 1990s with the class 101, built in the same number as the serial machines of the class 103, 145 machines. But their story wasn't quite over yet. While no longer being a star locomotive, they still found work to do in lower services like the beloved Interregio trains, or as stand-ins, when the machines that were supposed to replace them caused trouble. But when also the Interregio trains became fewer and fewer, and the class 103 was put in front of regional trains, their end was inevitable. The frequent starting and stopping something they were simply not designed for wore them out even faster. And by 2003, the last one was withdrawn from regular service. Was withdrawn, as besides stand-in services, a small number of locomotives even came back into regular service in the 2010s. And 3 locomotives, now employed by the DB Museum, can still be regularly seen pulling specials, while a 4th one is in regular service for the private operator Rail Adventure. Somehow this class just refuses to accept its retirement. And I'm all for it. You too? Just as tireless is the ongoing support of my channel members, BR151, Contrian, Dave Heise, Flipschwip, Kay Frankley and Lucas Ilskens. Thank you for helping me on this journey. And if you want to know more about the prototypes of the Class 103, I have just the video for you. Until next time, here at Steelbridge Models.